Now we move on to the third talk. By the way, this is the Esther Hoffman Beller Lectureship for 2022. And it's from Brito Cruz, who you already met. He already asked a question, but Brito is from the Elsevier. He's actually Vice President for Research Networks at Elsevier, and he's also from the University Campinas in Brazil. He's going to actually discuss sustainable development and scientific capacity building using research analytics to assess progress. So please, Brito, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Joe. It's a great pleasure to be here with this distinguished panel and with this audience at the March meeting of the American Physical Society. I'll share my slides. Let's see if you can see them. Are they appearing there?
Yes, we see them, yes.
Okay, very good. There. So I'm going to be talking about scientific capacity building in the Global South and its contribution to sustainable development. I will be following more or less this summary that is presented here, which is two questions I would like to address here. How much does research in developing countries target sustainable development? And what are the impacts or the benefits of that? And in order to start with some answers to those questions, I will use two approximations. One is an approximation that when we say research targets something, we are looking at the research publications. Publications are one of the outputs of scientific research. And the second approximation is that I'm going to rely on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as a proxy of topics related to sustainable development. I will try and go into a little more depth in these approximations in the slides that follow. The basic instrument that I'm going to use, considering scientific publications, is to analyze publications which appear in bibliometric databases using specially developed searches and methods that would allow us to classify the publications according to the SDGs. Of special interest for me at this moment are the contributions from India, Latin America, and Africa, which are three big hubs or big chunks of the Global South in terms of population and in terms of science and research. And I will also mention something about collaboration related to clean energy in what regards collaborations with the United States and China. And I will end by commenting about opportunities for research funding bodies in this relevant topic. So the general landscape for what I want to discuss is what I try to show in this slide. It comes from the fact that in 2021, there were 1 million scientific publications which had authors in developing countries, excluding China. Why is that I'm excluding China here? First, because in science and research, China is quickly leaving the world of the Global South or the developing countries and becoming a developed country in terms of breadth, in terms of the quality and the size of the research enterprise. As most of you have seen, last year, Chinese authors were authors to more scientific publications than authors from the United States. So the way I'm trying to analyze this is having one big chunk, which are the high income countries, 80 countries, population of 1.2 billion people. Then China, population of 1.4 billion people. And then a set of 137 countries, which are low income, lower middle income, upper middle income, excluding China, which in the World Bank classification is under the upper middle income classification. And those countries are home to 5.1 billion people. So I'm trying to make an analysis that looks at the world in terms of three poles, three hubs of research contribution. These 1 million scientific articles published by the Global South, which is how I'm going to call this collection of countries, low income, lower middle, and upper middle, corresponds to about 28% of the research published in the world in 2021. And it is more than 3 times the percentage which occurred in 1990. So there is clearly a growth in the contribution to research coming from the Global South. And that 1 million publications, 71% of them are publications in which the collaborations either happen among countries in the Global South or they do not have international collaborations. Those would be 71% of the publications. Then there are 25% of those publications in which authors from the Global South collaborate with authors in high-income countries, but not with China. And then there is another amount of 4% of the publications where the authors from the Global South collaborate with authors in China. So that's a picture of the world in terms of those 3 poles and in terms of the research collaborations that exist. And I will detail that in terms of sustainability in a moment. And to go into that detail, into those details about sustainability, I'm going to refer to the 2030 agenda that the United Nations General Assembly approved in 2015. And I'm going to use it not only because it has the legitimacy of being something approved by the largest international body that exists in the world, but because it seems to me to be a well-thought way to describe research related to sustainable development. And it is the product of a long discussion among hundreds of countries, their research communities, about classifying the main targets for the world towards 2030. And this agenda of sustainable development goals includes 16 goals which relate to reducing poverty, eliminating hunger in the world, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequality, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions. And to make it simpler to remember, the United Nations try to connect those goals with what they call the 5 Ps: people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. And of course, there are interlinks and there are interactions among the sustainable development goals. It's not the easiest thing in the world. I would say it's one of the more complex because, for example, in many regions, you will see that when a country or a region excels in reducing poverty, one of the effects is that a lot of people tend to buy automobiles and use their own automobiles, which means they are not contributing to reducing emissions or to responsible consumption and production or to climate action. So sometimes going ahead in one of the goals might cause you to go back in some other goals. So there is a complex interaction among the sustainable development goals. And as I mentioned in the introduction, to study those sustainable development goals or how science contributes, we mine information about the sustainable development goals in bibliometric databases. The way we do that is that there are a number of bibliometric databases that have metadata about millions of research publications. There are a dozen of those databases. So what we built at Elsevier is a number of searches that will categorize publications according to the SDGs. And of course, we are using the database that Elsevier built since the year 2002, 2003, which is called Scopus. And this database has covers 84 million scientific publications since the 1900s, 80,000 institutions of research in the world, 17 million author profiles, 26,000 scientific journals are covered in this database. And this is a work that has been in progress since 2015. In 2021, we launched the present version of this, which relies on SQL searches and on a machine learning algorithm that learns from the SQL searches and then creates or learns topics and strings and words that should be searched to improve the precision and the recall of the classification. That was done in interaction with several academic institutions and even the United Nations, so that there is a sizable effort to get to what we believe is a precise way to classify the publications according to the SDGs. One of the things that you find, if you look at the broad picture, is that for each one of the Sustainable Development Goals, there is a sizable growth since 1996, passing through 2006 and getting to the period 2016 to 2019. For example, in SDG number 3, which is the one related to health, the number of scientific publications was multiplied by 3, more than 3, 4 almost. For the SDG number 7, which is the one on affordable and clean energy, the number of scientific publications was multiplied by 8 or 9. In all of the Sustainable Development Goals, there is a sustained growth in the number of publications, which means in the amount of knowledge that is being generated by the research community across the globe. One way to look at these advances in science is to look at what we call a relative activity index, which is a ratio of the share of publications with authors in a certain entity. An entity can be a country, a region, a research institution. The share of publications that relate to SDG number N as a share of the total publications of that entity compared to the share that we see in the world. So that's a way to see if the focus on that SDG and that Sustainable Development Goal is above or below the world average of attention towards that sustainable development goals. And on doing that, for example, we can see this radar plot for the case of India, in which we see that India has a prominent attention towards the eliminating hunger, zero hunger, sustainable development goals. It has less attention towards quality education. It is below the dashed black line in the figure, shows the world average in terms of ratio. India has been increasing its efforts towards affordable and clean energy, and has also increased its efforts towards industry, innovation, and infrastructure. One can also learn from the database about the fraction of publications which have co-authors in other countries. And this is the figure for the case of India in terms of SDG number 7, which is affordable and clean energy, showing that they had around 20% of the publications with international co-authorship. Then it decreased to about 15, and now it's picking up again, increasing back to around 20. If you look at the same type of figure now for the case of Latin America in the left and Africa on the right, you will see that, again, there is substantial effort towards reducing hunger. There is some progress in terms of creating knowledge around quality education, gender equality, and there is a substantial interest in Latin America about life on land and life below water, which in many countries in Latin America relates to the sustainable development goal about zero hunger, because not only those two, life on land and life below water, include biodiversity research, but include also research related to raising cattle or chicken or pork to produce food and protein to their populations. In Africa, you will see substantial attention to zero hunger, substantial attention to the reduction of poverty, as one would expect, and interestingly, more attention to gender equality than one finds in the case of Latin America. In Africa, there is also some attention to life on land. And then one can analyze, as we can learn about, can also apply that not only to the developing world, but to, for example, the United States and China, and see how those two big mammoths of science and research in the world are faring for each one of the research of the sustainable development goals. We see that in the United States, there is an interest in reducing inequality. There is a sizable interest in gender equality. In China, there is most of the interest in clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy. And this difference between the interest of China in affordable and clean energy and the interest that exists, that is documented by the database in the United States, is a topic that generates some discussion, and that leads us to think that okay, one part of the problem is to create the knowledge. Another part of the problem for nations is to apply that knowledge, to have that knowledge transferred or created or used by industry, to convert that into patents and products that will actually solve the problems that one is considering, in this case, generating affordable and clean energy. Collaboration in the world around the sustainable development goals tends to be higher than the average for all fields of science, as you see in the blue line in this radar plot. In most of the sustainable development goals, it is outside the dashed black line, which is the average for the world in terms of research collaboration. And for Latin America and Africa, it's not that clear. You will see that, for example, in climate action, life below water, life on land, Latin America displays more collaboration than their average in all fields of science. The same happens for Africa, and Africa also has more intense collaboration in the topic related to zero hunger. We can also study and understand a little bit better how the global north and the global south collaborate in research. And this I try to show in this figure, in which the orange line shows the points of attention for the global south. The green line shows the points of attention for the collaborations between the south and the north. And we will see that the green line is driven by the orange line in most of the cases, but in some cases, the north-south collaboration is driven by the interest of the north, mostly in terms of research, like, for example, in gender equality, or if you look at climate action, for example. So that points to the fact that to generate research collaboration, you need to have interest in the topic in both sides. And this is one of the challenges about research collaboration in general, and about research collaboration for sustainability, as we will see with this example that I want to show to you about affordable and clean energy, where you will see, for example, that the global south collaborators of the United States and China and clean energy, the ones for the that collaborate more with the United States are the blue columns, and the collaboration with China is in the orange columns. You will see that India, Iran, Brazil, Turkey, Pakistan, Egypt, Mexico, South Africa are the main collaborators with the United States. And the sequence for China becomes different, as we see that, for example, Pakistan has a sizable amount of collaboration with China. Malaysia also collaborates much more with China than with the United States. The same for Vietnam and Thailand. That, in this case, might refer to geographical proximity, might refer also to the choice of topics or the easiness of finding topics of interest for both sides. For example, if you look at the low-income countries that Susan analyzed in much more detail in her presentation today, but a broad brush view of the topics of interest for low-income countries in clean energy go around biofuels, solar cells, solar energy, and biomass, and then solar energy again. So you see that biofuels, together with biomass and together with solar, take care of about 1/3 of the interest of low-income countries in terms of their research around topics of clean energy. If you go and look at the same distribution for the United States, we will see that the topics are much more around batteries, lithium batteries, electrodes, batteries. There is some sizable interest in solar energy and solar cells, but, for example, biofuels, which 15 years ago was high in the priorities in the United States, now is down to maybe classification 10th or 11th in terms of interest. So the matching of those two figures is what will tell us how easy or how difficult it is to establish research collaboration between those two regions. Going just to remind you of the figure for the low-income countries. Now, if you compare that with the figure that one obtains for the case of Brazil, you go again to the biofuels, biomass, solar cells. So the main topics of interest for Brazil are similar to the main topics of interest for low-income countries, and which brings me to highlight the idea that we should be talking more about South-South collaboration in research and not only about North-South collaboration, because the points in common might be more frequent when you talk about South-South collaboration. And not only in terms of research, but in terms of achievement. So I will make a short parenthesis here to show to you that Brazil reached the achievement of having 41% of all its energy, electricity, energy for transport, for industry, for houses, everything. 41% of the energy used in Brazil is renewable energy. There is no other country with a population larger than 60 or 70 million people. Brazil has 200 million people. No other country with population above 60 million people that has more than 12% of the energy coming from renewable source. So this is a substantial achievement that owes a lot to using sugar cane to produce ethanol to move the automobiles in the streets of every city in Brazil. They all have gas stations that sell ethanol. And of course, Brazil can use a lot of hydraulic energy and other renewables. So that relates to research done in Brazil in collaboration with several regions, but you will see that since 1978, Brazil has been learning and improving its knowledge about generating renewable energy. Interestingly enough, back in 1978, Brazil was interested in learning about generating energy from ethanol, not because of reducing emission, but because Brazil could not pay for the oil. We were living the times of the two oil crises in which oil was too expensive for the country. But anyway, that was a solution that became relevant also in terms of reducing emissions and in terms of contributing to the sustainability of bioenergy in the world, where this work led by researchers in Brazil involved 137 researchers from 82 institutions in 24 countries to write compendium about how to do bioenergy in a sustainable way. So that's an illustration, and researchers in Brazil are now targeting or looking for partners in Africa to discuss about bioenergy and to learn if this idea of bioenergy for the automobiles and for electricity could be used also in African nations. I will finish here by highlighting that these opportunities for collaborations include and depend a lot on the strategies that research funders will choose to follow. And just to give you an example, those are the 20 main research funders in the world in terms of publications that recognize funding from those funders. Main one here is the National Natural Science Foundation of China. Then there is the NIH of the United States, then the NSF, then several organizations in China, the United States, in Korea, in Brazil, there are 2 organizations, and then there is Germany here, and of course, the European Commission. So you see that those funders have sizable results, and they could be hubs of collaboration, working together with funders in other nations about sustainable development goals research. We just did a comprehensive study about the main funders in Latin America, and we are now working towards creating better connections among them. You will see that for all those funders, the percentage of publications which relate to a sustainable development goals or to any of the sustainable development goals is around 30% of what they fund. So it's a relevant effort, and with more collaborations, I believe it would be possible to obtain more results and more impactful results in terms of research geared towards sustainability. I will finish here by summarizing that the UN Sustainable Development Goals, besides mobilizing national goals and actions, offer a useful way to learn about the connections between research results and sustainability. In spite of asymmetric capabilities in the world, it's necessary to recognize that there are relevant efforts in the global south geared towards sustainability research, creating many collaborating and collaboration opportunities. Research collaboration can contribute to advance regional impact, and there are several opportunities for research funders to better contribute to this effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brito. That was very interesting. I'm looking for questions. Actually, that was an interesting, I should have said when I introduced you, you were also the scientific director of FAPESP, which is the funding agency for South America, for Sao Paulo state in Brazil. So do you have any examples of collaborations between funding agencies like NSF, FAPESP, or something else?
Thank you, Joe. Yes, there are many examples. During my tenure as science director at FAPESP, we organized agreements for co-funding research with dozens of research funders across the world, most of the funders that are part of the Global Research Council. And for example, there were very nice and large 5-year grants for research, for example, in collaboration with NSF to study biodiversity in the Amazon, or in partnership with companies to study greenhouse gas emissions, and several other collaborations. Collaboration is something that, in my experience, it's easier to develop than most people think, if you are flexible enough to change your rules. If you want everybody to follow your rules, you get nowhere. But if you are flexible to understand the bigger objective, then it's very possible to do a lot of research collaborations.
That's actually that's a very general point. I think that is good to keep in mind. Are there questions from the audience? Okay, and then please use the mic, and then.
Hello, thank you. Do you feel like there's an incentive for lower income countries to pursue these sustainability research as opposed to more profitable ones, besides, the sustainability aspect of them?
There is. The question, that's a good question, because it points to a potential divergence between sustainability and profitability. And it's true, there is profitability that attracts sometimes researchers. However, I should say that in some of the sustainable development goals, it seems that the advances in achieving the goals will depend on profitability. For example, when you talk about clean energy, someone is going to have to manufacture the stuff or to create the ways of generating energy, and that someone can make money out of that. But my point is broader than that. It is the fact that in the global south, there is a lot of interest in many countries, from governments, to address the social challenges that those countries face. And not always those social challenges will be won by profitable innovation. Sometimes it relates to policies that the government has to enact. For example, when you talk about conserving the environment, and that facilitates the governments to, or at least some more enlightened governments, to foster research related to biodiversity, to sustainable conservation of forests, and so on. So there are ways to work in a virtuous cycle among profitability and social benefits of research.
Okay. Cheryl, okay, there's one out there.
Professor, thank you for your talk. Along these lines of the previous question, perhaps in the spirit of broadening our approach, would you think it appropriate to also comment on like units of carbon contributed, between the global north and global south, and perhaps how that should direct our thinking?
Well, that's a broad topic and a complex one, right? Because it relates to who's going to pay for the sacrifice for us to make
that is
life
question,
better and longer. That is the question. And that is something that it seems to me the United Nations has been debating in those climate conferences. And there are some interesting examples related to that. For example, in Brazil, the Brazilian government created a system of carbon credits that is having a strong positive impact in not only in the reduction of emissions, but in making the reduction something monetizable for the companies that make the effort, so that they can sell the carbon credits to other companies which have more difficulty to reduce the emissions. Other countries are discussing that too. But, your question is the question of more than $1 trillion, right? The United States Congress today only approves things in units of 1 trillion, it seems. But that's not going to be enough to solve the problems that we are facing, which relate to the challenges of making a sacrifice today to have better life for people in the future. So that's one of the big challenges in economy. People do not like to make sacrifice to pay for benefits tomorrow. What would you say about 60 years later?
Well put. All right. Well, with that, we should wrap up. And thank you again, Brito, for a wonderful talk. Let's thank Brito again.